Welcome, everyone. I am so incredibly excited you're joining me today because we are tackling a massive, undeniably dark, yet just endlessly fascinating question. When you look back through the entire grand span of human history, what is it that truly makes a disease the most terrifying? I mean, is it just the sheer number of people it wipes out, or is it something else entirely? In this explainer, we're going to break down the anatomy of terror, and we'll see exactly what one specific infection stand completely apart from all the rest. So, right off the bat, we have to challenge a pretty basic assumption. Does deadliest automatically equal most terrifying? We usually think that fear scales perfectly with the body count, right? We assume that a higher number of casualties naturally equals the absolute highest level of terror. But is fear really just a numbers game? Or does it depend more on how a disease actually operates, how it changes you, and what it makes you anticipate? To really get a grip on this, let's set a baseline with the heavy hitters of human history. The massive pandemics. Smallpox, for instance. It wiped out roughly 300 million people in the 20th century alone, leaving many of the survivors with extensive facial scarring or even blindness. Then you have the plague, both the bubonic and pneumonic forms, which literally swept through entire streets and households, decimating populations while people just had to watch helplessly. And cholera? Well, it can drain fluid from the human body so incredibly fast that a seemingly perfectly healthy person could collapse and die within a single day. Each of these, for sure, has a very legitimate claim to being history's most horrifying disease. But they all operate on this massive, macro, highly visible level.
Section 1. The scale of terror. The individual threat.
Think about those massive pandemics we just talked about. They're highly visible, spreading through respiratory droplets or water, literally killing millions. But on the flip side, consider rabies. Rabies generally doesn't spread from person to person. It doesn't sweep through cities like wildfire. Its annual death toll is measured in tens of thousands, not millions. So why is it so scary? Well, rabies is terrifying precisely because civilization just continues on normally, right? All around one single person whose outcome has become almost completely fixed. It is a highly localized, entirely silent terror. Section 2. Anatomy of an infection. The silent journey. The true horror of this thing actually begins on day 1. A bite or a scratch happens, introducing infected saliva. But unlike other viruses that flood your bloodstream and instantly trigger your immune system's alarm bells, rabies is stealthy. It quietly gains access to the peripheral nerves near the wound, and then nothing. Just nothing. Next comes weeks or even months of completely silent incubation. The wound heals up, you probably completely forget about it, but the virus is microscopically inching its way up your nervous system, heading straight towards your spinal cord and brain. And then comes the end of normal. Out of nowhere, that old, totally forgotten scar begins to tingle or itch or burn. And that right there is the very first sign that the virus has reached the one place from which it cannot be removed. Section 3. The horror of symptoms. The body hijacked. Once that silence finally breaks, the disease attacks the very core of who the victim is. It literally hijacks the body's own communication system. Now, it essentially takes one of two clinical forms. On one side, we've got furious rabies. This is the version that gave the disease its ancient, terrifying reputation, right? Hyperactivity, agitation, hallucinations. And, this is the worst part, periods of absolute clear lucidity where the patient knows exactly what is happening to them. On the other side is paralytic rabies, which makes up about a fifth of human cases. It completely lacks that theatrical violence. Instead, weakness starts near the bite and just spreads upward, leading to paralysis and eventually a coma. So, furious rabies looks like madness, while paralytic rabies looks like a gradual disappearance. But make no mistake, they both converge on the exact same fatal end. Now let's look at one of the absolute most famous and disturbing symptoms in all of medical history: hydrophobia. People often misunderstand this as a literal fear of water, like a phobia you could just calmly sit down and discuss. Actually, scratch that. It's not a psychological fear at all. The patient might be intensely, desperately thirsty, but the split second they try to drink, their nervous system completely misfires. It triggers these violent, incredibly painful, involuntary spasms in the throat. The water itself is perfectly safe, but the brain treats it like an attack. It literally turns the human survival instinct against itself. The victim sees relief, they desperately want relief, and their own body violently rejects it. And honestly, it gets worse. Aerophobia.
A light draft of moving air blown across the face can trigger those exact same sudden, intense spasms and an extreme startle response. Just think about that for a second. Water and moving air, two of the most ordinary, essential sensations in everyday life, become unbearable triggers simply because the nervous system is in total chaos. It's really no wonder that historically, victims in this state appeared to be possessed.
Section 4. History and Desperate Cures. Medicine before evidence.
The history of how we tried to treat rabies is just a story of sheer desperation. Early civilizations definitely recognized the pattern. A dog goes mad, it bites, the human goes mad, the human dies. But without microscopes, they had to fight back with whatever they had lying around. They would burn the wound with a literal hot iron, physically cut the flesh out, use local herbs, intense prayers, or even apply fragments of the offending animal's anatomy to the bite. And here is the truly tragic trick of all these cures. Not every single bite from an animal actually transmits rabies, but because rabies is virtually always fatal when it does take hold, anytime someone was bitten by a non-rabid dog and happened to survive, they enthusiastically credited whatever random herb or ritual they used as a miracle cure. The unsuccessful patients, well, they simply weren't around to leave negative reviews.
Section 5. Pasteur and the Cure. The Race Against Time.
For Louis Pasteur, the stakes were incredibly clear. He noted, doing nothing carried its own experiment. The expected result was death. In July of 1885, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was brought to him. The poor kid had been bitten 14 times by a dog they believed to be rabid. Now, Pasteur wasn't a physician, and his inoculation had only ever been tested on animals. It was a massive ethical and scientific gamble. No way around it. But as the quote says, doing nothing was a guaranteed death sentence. So he did it. Pasteur's treatment worked, and Meister survived. From this, Pasteur realized something absolutely incredible. The uniquely long, slow incubation period of rabies actually gives medicine time to act. That one revelation led directly to modern PEP, or post-exposure prophylaxis. And the crazy thing, it starts with something almost offensively simple. Step 1. Just thoroughly wash the wound with soap and water for 15 minutes. Step 2. Get an urgent professional medical assessment. Step 3. Get the rabies vaccine and, if indicated, immune globulin. This simple, completely elegant procedure trains the immune system to intercept and destroy the virus while it's still quietly traveling up those nerves, long before it ever reaches the brain. Which brings us to the ultimate biological irony of rabies. Before symptoms appear, if you get this treatment, it is nearly 100% effective. Medicine can absolutely save you. But after symptoms begin, even just that very first tiny tingle, medicine is suddenly virtually 100% powerless. You basically have to endure an urgent medical procedure while feeling perfectly healthy, because by the time you actually feel sick, the window for rescue has completely closed. Rabies aggressively, unforgivingly punishes hesitation. Section 6. The Modern Paradox. Ancient virus, modern inequality. Here's a fascinating detail. Humans are actually an evolutionary dead end for rabies. We don't efficiently pass it on to anyone else. The cycle survives out in nature, in mammals. And yet, an overwhelming 99% of global human cases come from dogs. Our closest domestic companions, the very animals that live right on our doorsteps and in the streets where our children play, are the primary carriers. And because of that close proximity, combined with systemic global inequality, we see this heartbreaking number, 59,000. That is how many people, largely children in Africa and Asia, still die from rabies every single year. The technology to save them absolutely exists. But a vial of vaccines sitting in a refrigerator hundreds of miles away doesn't protect a child whose family simply can't afford the trip, or who honestly didn't think a tiny scratch was worth mentioning in the first place. Poverty basically turns a completely preventable disease right back into a fatal one. So the true answer isn't just treating humans after they've already been bitten. The ultimate solution is to vaccinate the animal reservoir, vaccinate the dogs. Breaking the chain of transmission before human is ever even involved is the single most cost-effective, powerful public health strategy we have. Now, it doesn't look like some dramatic Hollywood hospital rescue, but hey, that's exactly the point. Public health wins by making the story completely uneventful. Ultimately, rabies might not have the highest historical body count, but it forces us to view our own bodies and the animals we love with a profound sense of caution. It divides time strictly into two worlds, the moment medicine can save you and the moment it's just too late.
So the next time you hear about a stray animal scratch or an unexplained bite, I really want you to ask yourself, is it just a forgotten bite, or is it the beginning of a silent, terrifying countdown? Respect the bite, seek treatment, and please don't let the silence fool you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.